Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm Alan Cumming, and I am your host for this sumptuous breakfast of literary hors d'oeuvres. I just want to say I'm very happy to be here. The Javits Center is actually my favorite building in New York City. I just think it's such a great achievement that this building shows you that modern architecture can be warm and inviting and not the austere stereotypes that we tend to give it. Also, I really like the Javits Center because it makes me really appreciate New Jersey. Because every time I'm here, I want to dive in the river and swim to New Jersey. That's my shtick. Done. Anyway, I'm first up. These lovely people are going to tell you about their books, and so I'm going to tell you about mine. It's called Not My Father's Son. It comes out on October the 7th, and it's a memoir, but it's not really like a memoir of how I imagine I might have written a memoir of, you know, my showbiz, hilarious, sexy life. It's actually about. I wrote it because 4 years ago, I was asked to do the BBC TV show Who Do You Think You Are, when they trace your genealogy, and you know, you cry. And there was a mystery in my family about my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. I knew he died in Singapore, but he hadn't really come back after the war, and so, you know, I actually was very excited to do this TV show because I thought I'd be able to tell my mum the real story of what happened to her father. And also, one of the sort of themes in the book is about dealing with fame and dealing with the press. And I remember thinking that having at my disposal the BBC and the researchers, and it was kind of the best thing that had ever happened to me about being famous, was being able to take part in this show, to give my mum this gift and to solve this mystery. I was really, really wrong. This was at times the worst thing that ever happened to me about being famous, because I discovered eventually that my grandfather died in Malaysia playing Russian roulette. I know, and that was such a shock, and on many levels. And then, of course, the worst part was I had to tell my mother that. I had to tell my mother that her father had died in these really insane circumstances. So that was bad, and at the same time, as I was about to start filming the TV show, my father, who I had not seen for 16 years, he was estranged from us because he was a very violent, abusive man. My father kind of came out the night before I started filming, sent my brother to my apartment in London to tell me that I wasn't his son. Hence the title of my upcoming memoir. And so I went through this summer of discovery about my grandfather, also discovering stuff about myself. And it was this is sort of a dual narrative in the book. And the reason I wrote it was that after this happened to me, because there's lots of other weird shit happened too. That's only the beginning. And when it all kind of finished, or as it was happening, because it went on for quite a long time, I realized I couldn't stop talking about it. It filled my every moment. And of course, it is such a good yarn. It is a really great story, so everybody wanted to hear it. And, you know, I'd be at parties and people say, tell them the story about your granddad and your dad, and blah, blah. And so I did, and and then more things would keep happening, you know. My father died, and that other stuff happened when he died, and so I just thought, I want to write this down. I want to tell it, put it out into the world, but also I want to, in some way, kind of like, you know, expunge it. And so this has been very good and expensive therapy for me, actually, or expensive for you. But in writing it, I learned such a lot about myself, you know, a lot about. Because I go back in order to sort of make sense of the story in the present, I go back to my childhood. I go back and forth to my childhood, and some really quite brutal things that happened to me. And it's really an interesting thing to be taking it now out into the world, because I think, you know, my perception in the world is of quite a cheery chap, and, you know, I think it's quite interesting to, and scary, to say to the world, here's a me that you might never have guessed, and hopefully you would never have imagined. So I'm quite daunted by that at the same time as I'm excited to tell my story, because in some way, the telling of this story means that, I think the worst thing about any abuse is that if it happens repeatedly, it can become regular and accepted and normal for the people that it is happening to. And what I'm always going to take away from this experience is that my abusive childhood will never be, it will be discussed around the world, and it won't be accepted and normal. And that's such a great feeling that this, whatever comes out of this book and whatever happens, that I've made that change for myself. On a lighter note, thank you. The other funny thing I realized a lot in writing of it was how much my childhood and my father influenced my choice of becoming an actor, or not my choice necessarily, but certainly I had to learn about acting very early on to cope with living with this person. And that wasn't always a pleasant realization, frankly. But I sort of think to most of my peers, I kind of piss them off because I say things like, oh, acting's easy. You should just pretend to be someone and mean it. Don't over-mythologize it. Stuff like that. That makes their blood boil, let me tell you. But I think perhaps the reason for that is that my first studies in acting were completely about dealing with a real situation and just, having to monitor my behavior or understand my father's behavior. And then the other thing I learned about is, like my grandfather, who I never met, he died, the Russian roulette guy, in 1951. I realized that many traits in myself that I think are, things like being a little reckless and a little, too willing to walk down a dark alley or to, do a handstand in a glass room. Or the other night I wanted to body surf in a bar, and I didn't want to tell anyone I was going to do it. That's a bad idea. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. Those sort of things I recognize, those traits in me, I recognize from my grandfather. Learning about him, I realized that he was a very reckless man, and so it was fascinating to find out about yourself from a dead person, and to rediscover this life in your family. So that's what my book's about. And ultimately as well, though, my mom and my brother and I got through this really difficult time in our lives. And what I've really tried hard to do, and hope that comes across, is that this is a hopeful story. It's about people a family that does become closer in the end, and kind of a sort of redemption in terms of what happens to us in what we do with the incidents that happened, and this new knowledge of my grandfather and of my father. So I'm very proud of it, and I am looking forward to putting it out into the world. But as I say, it's a daunting thing, but I think that's why we write and why we are artists, is to put our lives into the world and see what people make of them. So I hope you like it, and tell your friends.